Welcome to the Horse Trailer Post podcast, the show where we cover anything and everything related to the horse trailer industry. I'm your host, Brad Heath, owner and operator of Double D Trailers. With over 25 years of experience in the horse industry, I'm excited to bring you the latest news, tips, and insights into everything equine. Can't wait to share my passion for horses and horse safety with all of you. So saddle up and join me every other week for the Horse Trailer Post podcast.
Welcome, everyone. This is the Horse Trailer Post podcast. I'm your guest host this week. My name is Caleb, and I'm a trailer design specialist here with Double D Trailers. And we have the privilege to be welcoming a guest host, Siddartha Kreaden. Siddartha is a member of the United States Equestrian team. She's a vaulting athlete. And you may remember from a previous episode that we also had a representative from the U.S. Equestrian team, Haley Smith. And they're both vaulting athletes. But Siddartha is beginning to transition into coaching, and so she has a little bit of a different viewpoint to share. So we just want to welcome you, Siddartha, to the podcast today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So first off, just to kind of kick things off, can you tell me a little bit about your background in horses?
Sure. So it's actually kind of a funny story. I grew up with not really a background in horses at all. Funny enough, both my parents are pretty allergic to horses.
Oh, wow.
And I remember growing up, my parents are Canadian.
Okay.
And so I would go for the summers to Montreal, Canada, and my mom would take me to her best friend's place in Ottawa. And her best friend had a ranch with horses, so I would look forward to going to her friend's place to ride every summer. I thought it was the coolest thing ever, working with horses and just horseback riding, right? But yeah, it's just ironic that both my parents are allergic. But my family, they're not really horse people, to be honest with you. So it's funny that I'm now really involved in this sport that is all about horses. We live and breathe horses. So
it's just you. You're the only one in your family that has really anything to do with the equestrian industry or anything.
That is right. Yep, just me.
That is very unique, I will definitely say, especially with the parents being allergic. That's kind of wild.
Yeah. It's pretty funny.
Well, let me ask you this. So for those who don't know, can you give us a little bit of a background as to what vaulting is and specifically equestrian vaulting?
Yeah. So equestrian vaulting is basically the art of gymnastics and dance on horseback as the horse is cantering in a circle. And there's a lunge line connected to the horse's bit. And there's a lunger, quote unquote, who's standing in the middle, holding the lunge line in a whip, kind of telling the horse where to go, basically.
So how did you get into that? Well, maybe you mentioned you were around horses growing up, but specifically vaulting, what really led you to that?
Yeah, so I think I was about 8 years old, and my parents, they wanted to take their own vacation somewhere. So I have an older sister. She's 4 years older than me. And when I was 8 years old, they sent us to this sleepaway summer camp in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California. And it was a 2-week program. So you sleep there and you have a full day of activities each and every day. And I remember I had signed up for this activity called animal care. And it was basically you take care of bunnies and cats. Funny enough, I found out that I'm really allergic to bunnies and cats.
Oh, wow.
That time. So my counselor was telling me, I really want to switch you out of this activity. You just seem kind of miserable. The only other activity during this time that's available and has room for you is equestrian vaulting. And I was like, what's that? She's like, it's dance on horseback. I was like, cool, that sounds great. Because at that time in my life, I was actually a pretty competitive dancer.
Okay.
I was into all things gymnastics and dance, right? Add a horse to it, I was going crazy. I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
So I ended up switching into equestrian vaulting for 2 weeks. And I remember my parents came to pick me up. And I remember that day you kind of bring your parents along with you to each activity. And vaulting was one of them. And both of my parents were kind of like, what is this sport? I've never seen this before. It's really cool. But is this a real thing? And I remember the counselor who was the instructor of the equestrian vaulting at Camp Candlein, that's what it's called. She pulled my mom aside and she was like, here's my business card. Here's the club I coach at. Your daughter needs to come and try out for my team. So that's kind of where it all started.
And you said you were 8?
8 years old, yeah.
Wow, man. So when your parents, this is just kind of like a funny thing with your parents, when they were walking around doing the different drills, when they got to the horses, did they start sneezing?
Oh, yeah, they did.
Really? That's funny.
Yes. They're the type of people, like, they walk into a barn and it's like they're rubbing their eyes and they're sneezing.
Oh, God.
So bad.
Man, that's wild. So with like I guess from that aspect, where did your journey take you from, when you started out at this camp when you're 8 years old? What was your progress like to be a U.S. team member for the equestrian vaulting?
So it all happened really fast, I would say. I was always really small, and I still am pretty small. So there's 3 different events in equestrian vaulting. There's individuals, there's pair vaulting, which is 2 people doing a routine together on the horse. And then there's the team vaulting. It's called squad, which is 3 people on a horse at once, and there's 6 members of your team. And each member has to get on the horse at least once. And you come up with a 4-minute routine, and it's judged based on different various criteria. But when I was 8 years old, I remember I started off at the trot, because in the U.S., we do trot vaulting for our little kids. Everywhere else in the world, they don't. But I started off at the trot. I was on a trot team. That was really fun. And then I only was at the trot for 1 year, which is pretty rare for someone my size when I was that little.
Yeah.
And so I remember I was moved up to the canter, and I was on a canter team, like a pretty basic, called a C team, which is the lowest level canter team. And then after that year of kind of like learning how to move with the horse and really learning how to, that was basically it, like really learning how to sit at the canter and do basic moves at the canter, I was asked to be on the highest level canter team because I was small and they wanted a flyer that they could just kind of, throw around up there. So I would say 2 years into my vaulting career, it really took off. And that team, when I was about 10 years old, we were trying out for the World Equestrian Games. Unfortunately, we didn't make it. We were like the runner-up. But that's when I really started getting my foot in the door competing in Europe. Because that summer, we had gone to Europe. I think we went once, but we went to the CHIO Aachen, which is like one of the biggest competitions you can do overseas in the summer. It's a big deal. And then every single year after that, I was on team after team going to Europe, spending my whole summers in Europe, training on different horses in Europe, trying to get used to them, and then competing alongside with them with my team all summer. So, it really took off. I would say when I was about 10 years old, up until 2018 was my last time competing in Europe.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's got to be cool to be able to go and hopefully you were able to do some sightseeing when you were there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. It's not all training, I promise. Yeah. You have a lot of downtime to go and sightsee and, do fun stuff.
That's awesome. That's an awesome experience to be able to grow up doing that, especially being able to do something we love and have a passion for. So kind of with that, what would you consider would be like some of your biggest accomplishments as a vaulting athlete?
Okay, so I'll start off by talking kind of a little bit about the 2014 World Equestrian Games. I was on a pretty young team, but we were extremely talented. And so we told ourselves, you know what, why don't we just try out for the World Equestrian Games? Like, if we don't make it, we don't make it, whatever. So my team that spring, technically, we were going to every selection trial and we were winning. It was crazy. Like, I think we were considered a junior team, which meant all of us were under 18. And we were just winning every single selection trial. And then finally, when it came down to the time for the U.S. committee and the judges to decide who they were sending that summer to Normandy, France, actually in 2014, that's where it was.
Nice.
They decided on our team, our little junior team. So that was a huge accomplishment for us. I'm so grateful we were able to go that year. We brought our own horse from the U.S. all the way to France and competed on him at the World Equestrian Games. And I think that year we ended up 7th, which is pretty great. And then the following year, we actually kept the same team, like the same team members, except for one girl we switched out. And that summer, we knew that there was going to be something called the first ever Junior World Championships. So in Europe, they had at the time, this division called juniors, which was 18 and under. And there was individual, pair, and team. And in the US, like, we hadn't really had a competition that was only juniors. So this was a big deal for us. We were a junior squad, and we knew we were really, really talented, and we didn't really know much about other junior squads out there. So we tried out, we qualified, and at that time we were borrowing a horse from Denmark. We were kind of leasing him. We had an agreement, and we went to that competition, and that year it was in Ermelo, Netherlands, and we got third overall at the first ever Junior World Championships. So that's my biggest accomplishment, I would say.
Man, I'm thinking this is not a direct correlation by any means, but just growing up, I remember watching like the Mighty Ducks movies. And when they went to like the US teams, and I think it was the second Mighty Ducks movies, like they had hockey players from all over the country that came and formed this team. Is that kind of how that worked with the junior team doing that?
So I was really fortunate at that time when I was living in California. All of my team members, they were from like the same area, which was
nice.
Great. Yeah. So it made training so easy during the off season. We would all get together. It was really intense that year. I think we practiced 4 days a week, and each practice was like 4 hours long.
Oh my gosh. And how old were you at the time for this?
At the time, I was 16.
Man.
And I was still
in school. Well, I guess you were somewhat great.
I was still in high school. Yeah. It was really intense. I was full-time high school student, and then basically no social life. I was just going to train, getting good sleep, so then I could go to training the next day. But those are sacrifices you make.
Well, yeah, because then you get to go to the Netherlands and France, and that's awesome. Well, you said you had to ship the horse. I'm curious, how did you do that?
So we've actually done it a few times. Okay. A lot of people do it, like the dressage world, the jumping world. They're constantly shipping their horses on the airplane.
Okay.
So, yeah, our horse Stanford, he went on the airplane. We trailered him down to LA, and he went with jet pets, like the airline. I think he flew into Amsterdam, but it's a cool experience. I personally didn't get to fly with him. Our lunger did, and she traveled safely with him all the way to the Netherlands. And then I think what we did was we rented a trailer and a truck, and we trailered him from the Netherlands to France, where we were training that summer.
You hear a lot of stories, of course, with horses and trailering. I cannot imagine how a horse feels at an airplane.
I know. Apparently, though, a lot of people say, I've heard a lot of podcasts about this. People say that it's a lot safer than the trailer, actually, because the horse has to go and stall on the airplane. Yeah.
Well, they say that, the same thing, I guess, statistically, it's safer for humans to travel in an airplane than it is. And, I mean, you see the people driving nowadays, I can understand that for sure.
Yeah.
So, well, as far as like, when you thought about your transition, how do you think being your experience as a vaulting athlete is going to influence your approach in coaching, as you make that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was thinking about this the other day, actually, and something I like to do, and talk about with my vaulters is if they're going to a new facility that they've never been to before. And I remember vaulting in that facility, in that footing, and they're like, "Oh, what's the footing like?" I'm like, "Oh, well, let me tell you what it's like." So I've been to almost every venue out there, which is great. So I can kind of give my vaulters a little tip on that, which is always helpful. Another thing is I'm actually still vaulting. I think I have 1 or 2 more years in me, actually. Gotcha. But it's really helpful while I'm still vaulting when I learn something that makes a move easier, like a little tip. I'll pass that along to my vaulters, and I'll say, what actually really helps your mount is if you hold this way and not this way. So I just feel like as I'm still vaulting, I'm still learning and growing, and learning so much about horses at the same time too, and how to move with them. But it's all about harmony with the horse, our sport. It really is. And moving as one. So I can't stress that enough. And every practice, I'm telling that to one of my vaulters who I'm coaching pretty intensely right now. I'm like, you just got to sit there. Like the first thing I'll tell her to do is sit on the horse and put your hands on your stomach and just move with the horse. Yeah. So I guess as I'm still vaulting, I am still learning and I'm passing those tips along to all of my athletes.
Gotcha. So, you said you have, I think, maybe 1 or 2 years left in you as far as you actually participating in vaulting. So what has inspired you to make that transition into coaching?
So I feel like during COVID is when I started coaching I took it on pretty intensely. I moved back home from college. I was going to college in Colorado at the time. And during COVID, my parents told me to move back home to California, which I agreed to. And I remember it was about May of 2020. And things were starting to open up again. Our vaulting club was starting to open up again, but very differently, like just one-on-one with coaches and one-on-one with like a coach and a lunger and a horse. So I remember my club, Woodside Vaulters, based in Woodside, California, they reached out to me and they were like, hey, we want to open up our club again. And it's going to be very different because of COVID. We're going to do private lessons. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, why not? I don't really have much going on and I'm home for the summer. It's kind of COVID. So sure, let me do it. So I remember starting to coach, like, I would say like all afternoon, every single day of the week. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. And of course, they were only privates, and they were like 30 minutes each. They weren't even that long. But I fell in love with it. And I was still vaulting at the time too. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. I can kind of teach these athletes like what I'm learning right now and tips that I have and things that I'm finding out that are easier to do. And like I just really took to it, which was great.
Well, it sounds like as far as like, that's something you have a passion for. So, I'm sure you can only do that physically for so long. And it's a really easy way for you to still, kind of funnel your passion into these up and coming athletes to be able to, inspire the next generation and continue to teach them cool tricks and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you mentioned you're currently kind of doing a dual role right now between the athlete and the coaching. So how is it going overall with the coaching that you're doing now?
So it's really taking off, actually. I've started to host clinics in different states where vaulting clubs have reached out to me and they've asked me to come out and do vaulting clinics with their clubs, which is huge. I currently still coach at my club, Woodside Vaulters, where I'm also an athlete. And I'm also coaching this 2-star young vaulter who is trying out for the Junior World Championships this summer. And those championships are held in Flinga, Sweden. And she's from Colorado and she's trying out for the US team. So that is kind of where most of my energy is at right now because she has a competition next weekend in Woodside, actually. So I'm going to go and coach for my club Woodside and also be there for my athlete who's trying out. So that's kind of it for now. Clinics, coaching at Woodside, and coaching my athlete from Colorado.
Gotcha. That's really cool to be able to kind of, I'm sure you kind of maybe see yourself a little bit in her trying to make that trip overseas to do the World Championships.
Yes, I really do. It's so much fun working with her. Yeah.
That's cool. You have that connection there. So what do you think and I'm sure you probably share this with her and your other athletes that you coach, but what do you think are some like key skills or qualities that you have to be successful in vaulting?
So I always like to tell my vaulters, it's not all a physical game here. It's also, you need the mental aspect of it as well. Like you need to be just as strong physically as you are mentally for this sport. I would say some key terms that really, really have stuck with me throughout my entire career of vaulting are like having a hard work ethic, determination, having resilience. That's huge too. And knowing how to work with your equine partner.
Yeah.
If something is not working, if something is upsetting the horse, maybe take it out or figure out why it's upsetting them, right? So I cannot stress enough how working in harmony with your horse is just, it's the biggest aspect of vaulting, right? So I do a lot of mental training also with my athletes because it can be really, really nerve-wracking going into like a selection trial and you don't, like your brain kind of shuts off, right? As an athlete, you get so nervous. So with my athlete who's from Colorado, we've been doing a lot of mental training, a lot of breath work, a lot of visualizing. I cannot stress that enough too. Visualization has helped me so much throughout my vaulting career. Whenever I'm learning something new, I like to do it on the stationary barrel first, and then I'll kind of take a moment for myself. I'll close my eyes and visualize myself doing it on the horse, and then I'll attempt it on the horse. That makes sense.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like a 3-step process you got going on. Yeah, I would imagine, probably like you said, the number one thing would be that harmony with your, with the horse and being able to just know how they're feeling. And if they can't talk to you, it's not like you're working with another person and they be like, hey, that's not working.
Yeah.
You just got to kind of take the cues as they are given.
Yeah. And it's so cool too, because once your horse actually starts learning your routine, they start getting used to it, which is amazing. And then they start like relaxing and they like know what's coming up and it's not a shock to them, right? Like when you're first learning new moves, they can kind of, their ears are kind of like going, what's going on up there? But then over this, like the winter training season up until like the spring, when you're really like honing down on those routines, they don't care. It's so cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure like for the junior athletes, trying to balance, like they're still probably learning themselves, let alone trying to learn an animal that they rely upon. That's a big deal.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. I would think the mental, like you said, I really think about that, but the mental would definitely come into play as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we wrap up, can you share kind of what your goals and aspirations are as you make this transition to full-time coaching? And, how do you plan to contribute to the growth of the sport of vaulting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a coach, I just want to hopefully inspire some of my athletes to one day give back just like I am and continue to vault or coach or do both or just one. But I've really taken such a liking to coaching. It's honestly one of my passions now. So I just hope I can inspire other athletes to want to do what I do and help the sport of vaulting succeed. And yeah, for now, I would just say I continue to be an active coach because I don't really know where my life's going after that. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, I think like you said, one way to contribute would be just you like being an example of like, hey, I grew up since I was 8 years old doing this sport and I love it so much. And then I'm turning my passion where maybe I can't continue to do it myself, but I can flip it and train up, the up and comings and maybe keep that cycle going. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's huge. I love that.
I guess where would be the best way for people to contact you if they are interested in coaching or vaulting or, just asking questions maybe?
Totally. Well, there's maybe 3 methods. I have a pretty active TikTok. My name on TikTok is Siddartha, my first name _vaults, VAULTS. Same thing for Instagram. I have an Instagram that I'm constantly posting on and talking to people on. Same thing, Siddartha Vaults. And email is also another great way of reaching out.
Okay, cool. So we will, for all the watchers and listeners on this, if you're interested in chatting with Siddartha or just seeing kind of what she does with the vaulting and kind of how that works, we will send some information along with this podcast. So we really appreciate you taking the time, Siddartha, to be with us today and just to kind of share your experience as a vaulter and where your life is heading. We wish you the best for sure.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.